Okay, so this is gonna be my first attempt at making an ASMR video. To clarify, literally all I'm gonna be doing is talking about what's on my mind in a slightly quieter voice than usual. And I guess I'll try and talk slowly. I had an idea a while ago of making videos every now and then, talking about things that were on my mind. Because a lot of the time I have sort of thoughts relating to philosophy or psychology and these kind of weird conceptual ideas. And based on the feedback of some of you from my Q&A videos and a few of the other safer work videos I've done, you seem to find the way that my mind works interesting. So I was gonna do that, but I never got around to it. And I've always thought about doing ASMR videos as well. My voice, and for some people my accent as well, is a big part of my brand. And it seems to be one of the things that people really like about me. So it makes sense to branch out and do ASMR videos, but I never really knew exactly what to talk about. And as weird as it might sound, I never really thought that I'd be comfortable or that it would come naturally at all to do the role plays that a lot of people do on YouTube. And so I decided to combine these two ideas of doing ASMR and just talking about what's on my mind. I guess the main purpose of these videos would be to help people go to sleep. I think that's probably the best thing. But of course, maybe some people will like to listen to this just to get relaxed. And maybe if you do find things that I talk about interesting, you might listen and actually pay attention to what I'm saying. And just to clarify, I'm not claiming that I'm going to be talking about anything interesting. I don't expect anybody to be interested in the weird things that go on inside my head. But you never know. Another thing is that I'm filming this during the day. I originally planned on filming it at night. I figured the lighting would be a little bit better, because right now it looks kind of bright. Also, it's Monday, 1 PM. It's pretty much going to be as loud as it ever is outside. Of course, I've closed my windows, but if you hear cars go by, or music, or construction, then I apologize. But hopefully it's quiet enough. So, in terms of how often I'm going to be uploading these videos, I think I want to aim to try and maybe do one a week. Now, I've done series in the past where I've made a single video and then claimed to plan on making more, but then I never got around to it. So I suppose there's a chance, just like with the others, that I make this video and then never make a follow-up. And then if I ever do, it might not be as often as I think it's going to be. But I figure one a week shouldn't be too difficult, and a week is enough time for me to build up enough thoughts to ramble on about in these videos. I think this is so bright, it's unbelievable. Also, I have a lot of Vaseline on my lips right now because I get dry lips. I hope it doesn't look too weird. One thing that I've been thinking about lately is Stoicism. I'm going to try and stop swinging my chair around. I recently watched a video about Stoicism, and I had always heard of the word and the term Stoicism, and I knew that it was a philosophical ideology, but I never actually knew what it entailed. And after watching the video, I realized that I'm pretty close to a Stoic, and I didn't even realize it. But I think that's probably a common thought. As far as I understand, and it was only a short video, and it was quite a while ago, as far as I understand, the whole idea of Stoicism is, well, at least one takeaway that I took from it was kind of being aware of the separation between the internal and the external. The internal, sorry, I had a pain in my eye. The internal being everything that goes on inside your mind, and the external being everything that happens outside your mind. And once you understand those two separations, you then have to come to the understanding that everything, or at the very least most things, I think when it comes to Stoicism, the general belief is that you deal with absolutes. So everything that exists in the external is completely out of your control, and everything that exists in the internal is completely in your control. Most people see life differently to that, and I would even argue that the reality is different than that. I think it's very rare that you'll ever have anyone that actually has 100% control of their internal, meaning their mind, their thoughts, their emotions. And I think you could definitely make a strong argument that everybody has the potential to have some level of control over their external. But of course, we're talking about a philosophical idea here. So when it comes to Stoicism, you can't control anything in the external, and you can control everything in the internal. And even though I don't believe that that is 100% true in reality, I think it's definitely beneficial to a certain extent to adopt that mentality, or at least to strive to achieve what the Stoic is. And I, like with most philosophical ideas, try and apply it to my life. And of course, like anyone, I have problems. Let's say psychological and emotional problems. And like with everyone else, it goes up and down, and sometimes it's worse than other times. So I try and apply this idea of Stoicism to the worst times. And I think that it really does help, in theory, to deal with psychological and emotional problems. I think if you're in a position where you're very close to the ideal Stoic in terms of how you think and how you feel, you're essentially setting yourself up to be able to deal with any problem that life throws at you, which I suppose is probably the purpose of Stoicism. To maybe try and give some examples. I think something that most people would consider to be the worst thing that could ever happen to them in life is the death of a family member. That's commonly seen as something that is the worst thing that can happen to people. And if you adopt the mind of the Stoic, then you see that death as something that exists in the external. Somebody else dying is completely out of your control. It exists outside of your mind, outside of your internal, and therefore you had no control over that event. There's nothing that you could have done to stop it or change it. It just happened. Of course, life doesn't care about you. The universe doesn't take your emotions or your thoughts into consideration. It just is. So that thing happened externally. And then of course the pain, the sadness or the anger, the negative emotional and psychological effects that thing that happened in the external has on you, all of those exist in your internal. And that's a good thing, because your internal is the only place where you actually have control. It's the only place where you can actually change the way things are. So if all of the problems exist in the place where you have 100% control, then it couldn't be more perfect. So the idea is that if you understand and are able to achieve 100% control of your internal, again meaning your thoughts and your feelings, then it means that you can overcome any problem. It means that when that family member dies, you first of all realize that you had no control over that. And then you realize that the sadness and the anger and the pain that you feel as a result of that death can be controlled, and it can be ended by you. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I thought it was almost impossible, at least for most people, to really, truly achieve the mind of a Stoic, just because I'm not 100% convinced that emotions are 100% controlled. I definitely think that it's obvious that some people have more control over their emotions than others. I definitely think if you're someone that is studying Stoicism or is striving to become a Stoic, then over time you will get more control over your emotions than you did before. But the idea that you could ever have 100% control, I think, is at the very least debatable. Using the same example of the death of a family member, I think that in reality, if anyone's family member died, they wouldn't be able to stop themselves from feeling as a result of that event, despite their perception of it being external. Of course, Stoicism is a philosophical idea, and if you take this step over into the psychological ideas, the only people in the world that don't feel emotions are psychopaths. And according to psychology, there are steps of grief that people must go through and that is healthy to go through in order to be able to live with and deal with the death of a family member, let's say. And so this idea of a family member that you really loved dying, and you understanding that as being completely out of your control, and then as a result controlling your emotions to the point where you are not upset by their death, could be seen as an unhealthy way to approach it in the eyes of a psychologist. Of course, I don't think anything is really as clear-cut as that. I think it's a case-by-case situation. At the end of the day, if you can find a way to be not necessarily happy, but at the very least content with the death of a family member, however you are able to do that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And of course, a lot of the time, maybe you are in denial about how you really feel about the situation, and suppressing your true natural emotions could be negative for you psychologically. Of course, these things are so complicated and complex, it's impossible to really say. And the example of a family member dying or a loved one dying is pretty much as extreme of an example as you can get. I think maybe Stoicism, when applied to a lot of other things, is definitely a little bit more beneficial. If you're having financial issues, or maybe you're just generally feeling depressed or down, you feel lost in life, whatever it might be, I think trying to adopt this mentality of Stoicism will be a lot more helpful in those situations. I don't know if it's difficult for me to remember a lot of times when I read or hear about philosophies or psychological ideas. I'll take in a certain amount of information and then my brain will kind of add to it. So the line is always kind of blurred as to which information I consumed and which information I fabricated myself. But I had some ideas about this concept of the external and the internal. So it was in relation to the terms of bad and wrong and evil. I suppose if we use the same example which I've just realised I've been talking about family members dying in a video that I claimed to try and help you sleep. I'm probably going to end up giving you bad dreams at this point. But regardless, using the same example of a loved one dying, I suppose everybody always looks at death as a bad thing. But I suppose this is all in relation more so to my general perception of the word bad and good anyway. I think there's hardly any context in which those words make sense. At least not in the way that people usually mean them. For example, I really hope you can't hear that outside. It's getting kind of loud out there. Okay, I've left it for a few minutes. Hopefully the noise will die down. I don't even know if you can hear it, honestly. I believe what I was talking about was the ideas of good and bad, which is kind of an interesting topic in itself, but to try and connect it and keep it related to Stoicism, I suppose the way I see it is, if I come to this understanding that everything in the external is out of my control, then in a weird way that relates to this idea of whether or not it's bad. Most people will look at the death of a loved one, or really the death of anybody, and see it as this horrible bad thing that shouldn't have happened and that is wrong. And even down to when you see the death of someone in the news that you've never even met before, it comes across as this tragic thing. But of course, it's not wrong or bad that people die. It's only ever wrong or bad once you interpret it. Okay, I'm going to try this again. I'm going to try and be a little bit quick and wrap this up because it's getting loud outside. So, I believe I was talking about the idea of things inherently being good or bad in relation to Stoicism, or more specifically, the idea of the external and the internal. So, when somebody dies, it's usually seen as this horrible bad thing. But I think it's an interesting mental exercise to try and look at things a little bit differently. My understanding of it is that everything that happens externally is determined not by you, but by the universe, let's call it. Of course, the universe doesn't care about you, or your thoughts, or your emotions, or what you think about what it's doing. It just is. And so, when something happens as a result of the universe being the way it isn't wrong, or bad, or incorrect in any way. If anything, it's exactly as it's supposed to be. And of course, the universe doesn't have emotions or thoughts itself. It just goes through the motions. And so, it doesn't do anything out of malice or ill intent. It just happens. And it's interesting that the only time anything ever seems to be bad is when you find out about it. That's an interesting coincidence, wouldn't you say? If my brother got shot in the head and they dumped his body in a forest, and they didn't find his body for 7 days. And then after 7 days they called me up and said, "We're sorry, but we've just found your brother's dead body." I would be emotionally broken probably, and I would see the event of my brother dying as a very bad thing. But it's interesting how it wasn't bad or wrong, and there was no negative effect in the world at all the moment he died, and for the 7 days after his death. My life was completely normal and continued on as normal, as did everybody else's lives, while his body was in the forest. And the only time everything becomes bad is when I find out about it, or when my mum finds out about it, etc., etc. And so I think the conclusion that we can come to there is that things are only ever bad or wrong or incorrect when we interpret them. When we interpret them that way. And of course, our interpretations of anything that happen in life exist in the internal. It happens inside our minds. And once again, in the mind of a Stoic, you have 100% control over your internal. And even though I don't fully agree with that idea, I think it's definitely beneficial to strive for that, and to at least consider the possibility that maybe you could control everything, or at least control more than you do now, internally. And so it's interesting how this event of my brother dying would hypothetically be something that would be the worst thing that ever happens in my life. And yet, the only reason why is because I assume that I would interpret that as a horrible thing. Which is funny when you take into consideration, the fact that hypothetically I could have 100% control over how I interpret that event. It's a weird little paradox. I suppose another layer to it would be that a lot of people wouldn't want to interpret it any other way. You know, if my brother died and I was somehow able to make a conscious decision to interpret his death in a positive way, and say to myself, well, he doesn't have to deal with the struggles of life anymore. He's finally at peace. I'm not religious, I don't believe in heaven. I think when you're dead, your brain's gone, your body's gone, you're done. Even so, death is more peace than any of us will get in life. So I could potentially find a way to put a positive light on it. But then I think to myself, would I even want to do that? Would I think to myself that it's almost in a weird way disrespectful to my brother to think that way? We're kind of conditioned to see death as a bad thing, and so the idea of seeing it as anything other than a bad thing seems like it could be disrespectful. Or seeing death as anything other than wrong is in of itself wrong. I don't know. I watched this short video about Stoicism, and it sparked a lot of weird little ideas in my head. And I think I have a lot more, but because of how loud it's getting outside, and because I assume this video is about 30 minutes long now, which is probably how long I'm going to aim to make these videos, I'm going to call it there. And I think in the future I'll just record these at night. Hopefully you didn't actually make it to the end of this video and you're asleep right now. Hopefully, if not, it's only because you're interested in what I'm saying. I understand, as I mentioned, that this is just me rambling and ranting on about weird little ideas that I have. But let me know. I suppose another really important thing is the audio quality. I actually have a pretty bad mic at the moment. My good mic broke, unfortunately. So I hope that this mic picks up my voice well. But we will see. Of course, leave your feedback, because I do want to hear it. Bye.